Bill Henshaw here again for the Constitutional Crisis channel. This will be a little kind of an offbeat video from what we've been doing to this point, but it occurred to me after having 50 or so videos already up that some of you might be wondering, if you've seen most of them, where and how it is that I came into this knowledge that I have. And that's not easy since they're not teaching it in the schools anymore. You can be damn sure of that. And very little even in the elite law schools, although they're probably in the elite classes in Harvard and Yale, you may get some of this stuff. But I'm going to show you some of the books that I have gotten. Most of them are first editions, and for good reason, and recommend some that you can read. And none of them need to be read cover to cover. That's the good news. More often than not, I've done that, but there's even an exception or two there. But they cover American history and the Constitution, common law, and current events, or then current when the books were written. And this is where I derive a lot of my knowledge from, and it's allowed me to use the references in the book to come up with some other things, a lot of which appear in my briefs and my petitions and my pleadings. It's where I get this stuff from. It's not accidental. Okay, the first one is the oldest of one, and it's part of a trilogy of books written by John Burgess back before the turn of the century in the 1890s. This first one is called The Middle Period. And it covers a history that you don't get too much of in school. Even I didn't when I was in school, from 1818 to 1858, which is effectively between the War of 1812 and the war between the states. Now, Burgess fellow was at the time the dean of what was then the Columbia College School of Law. It's now known as the Columbia University. And he admits in this book, in the opening prologue, and yes, I read those, he says, yes, I have a clear northern bias here, but I readily admit a lot of things were done wrong, especially in the war between the states, to the southern states and to their interests. And his writing style is really, it's amazing. It's not just like the writing you're going to see in any school books you get in school. It's much better than that. And he's obviously done his homework, and he has references. He doesn't say anything without being able to support it, and that's exactly what I do. If I can't prove it, I don't say it. And these three books, the second volume is the Civil War and the Constitution, and the third volume is Reconstruction and the Constitution, and they're extremely valuable entries to any library. If you get lucky, you might get them online for $10 or $12, the first edition. They've reprinted them in softcover. They're like 25 or 30 bucks a pop, but I normally don't deal with those because you don't know, what additions or deletions may have occurred over that time. So I don't trust things like that unless I have good reason to do so. But they're out there. You can find them. So I highly recommend these three series on American history. You won't see anything like these, at least I haven't, in all my 4 decades of doing this. Number 2, chronologically speaking, is a book called The Supreme Court in Crisis, written by Merlo Pusey, P-U-S-E-Y. And this is contemporaneous, another first edition book in 1937. And it discusses the then ongoing court packing plan by good old fascist dictator Roosevelt. And it tells you in no uncertain terms what was going on there, and the attempt to blacken the reputations of the 4 horsemen, about whom I spoke a great deal on the videos, and try to get the court from changing from 5 to 4 against New Deal legislation to get them to go at least 5-4 in their favor, and they succeeded in doing that, unfortunately. But this is another extremely good independent book, and it's well worth reading. The polar opposite of this one is called The 9 Old Men, a hit piece written by Pearson, probably at the request of FDR. In fact, I suspect that the Merlo's book, The Supreme Court in Crisis, was written in direct response to that book. But it's interesting in that you can see just how far, certain people in the press are willing to go to blacken the reputation of justices who did not deserve any of it. So if you keep that aspect in mind when you read this book, you'll be well off. Don't take it with a grain, maybe more than a grain of salt. But it will be interesting reading anyway. Hey, now we come up to one of my favorite books, and you can see by the book it is well used. Fortunately, I've been able to get this one in digital form, and you can too, called The Pied Pipers of Babylon by Verl Speer. And I had the pleasure to meet Verl years ago when I was starting out in the 80s, and that's where I got a hold of a copy of this book. And it's basically a history, of the Constitution and the common law, and he breaks it down into a lot of interesting subdivisions. For example, the Limited Liability Act of 1851 is discussed in there, and how that came into being. That's been a big boon to the insurance companies, trust me. And he talks about the 14th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and some other things across the board. And a big case we're going to do a special video on later that I'm not going to do now, but on Erie Railroad v. Tompkins. And to me, that's EERIE, Railroad v. Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64. A case that's confusing most people, even in law schools, is what the hell the court said and did there. But it's a video for another day. But this book, and it's a bit technical, by the way. It's not a law book per se, and there's a lot of common sense in it. But there are sections where it does get a bit technical, talking about cess decay trust and social insecurity and all that. But it's a good read, and you don't even need to come close to reading this from cover to cover. You can just go to particular sections that interest you. Now, that said, next book up is called Best Evidence by David S. Lifton. And you read this one, and you can't come away with any other position than that quote-unquote Lee Harvey Oswald not only didn't do it, he didn't fire shots at anybody. I mean, this is a dead bang truth, and he talks about the alterations that were made on Kennedy's body from the time it left Parkland Hospital in Dallas until it arrived in Washington, D.C., and actually Bethesda, Maryland, at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And there's no question about it that they changed the trajectory of the shots to make it look like Kennedy had been shot back to front, when the opposite was true. This is another author that's done his homework. This is a keynote for me. If they've obviously done the work, and can support what they say, and he went to a lot of trouble over 15 years writing this book to do it, you can't come away with any other position than that Oswald didn't do anything. Quote-unquote Oswald. It wasn't even Oswald. That's another story for another video. Okay, best book I've seen on the Supreme Court of the United States, The Brethren, by Bob Woodward and Scott Armstrong. And in here you read a lot of inside details about the court. They actually got some of the clerks of court to talk to them, some of the justices' clerks, and even a couple of the justices chimed in on this. And you get a lot of inside information about the court, like what I talked about on earlier videos with good old Warren E. Best or Berger. This is where this stuff comes from. And you don't get it in just any book on the court. And this is far and away the best one I've seen. Another good set of books that I don't have to hold up and show you, and I've got my original first editions on this, The Supreme Court in United States History by Charles Warren, published in 1926. It's considered to be the definitive work on the history of the court to that point. Another note about Charles Warren was he was the author of an article in the Harvard Law Review that resulted in supporting the decision in the case of Erie Railroad v. Tompkins. And it's called New Light on the Judiciary Act of 1787. And boy, do I think that's screwed up, and I think the justices read it wrong, but that's my own personal opinion. But he had that kind of pedigree with the legal community at the time. So he was well known, and he wrote this 2-volume set of books that's well worth looking into. A good library will have a copy of it. You can go there and maybe take it out and at least read it there if they won't allow you to check it out. Hey, another interesting one that doesn't seem to be related here, but I think it is the biography of Will Rogers. This guy was an American hero. The bottom line is, and he was a very good comedian in the bargain, which wasn't a bad thing. And there's a lot of good stuff about him. He was born, by the way, at the time in what was called the Oklahoma Territory. This is before it became the quote-unquote state of Oklahoma in 1907. But as you know, if you looked at my other videos, Oklahoma wasn't admitted into the Union then either. But he had a lot of problems and political foibles, especially with the Roosevelt administration at the time. And he was a go-getter, and he actually went out and did a great deal more in helping the poor people, especially in the South, than any of these bastards in the FDR's New Deal did. And like I say, the guy's an American hero. We need celebrities of this quality today. I only wish we had anyone close to Will Rogers. So this is well worth reading, and I did so in this case cover to cover. Hey, now the works of Ayn Rand, R-A-N-D. She's the one that created the Objectivist philosophy. Anything she has, particularly her newsletters called the Objectivist newsletters, and they were put out from about 1961 until 1972. If I had seen one of those in my formative years, my life would have been different. Even reading them now, 40 and 50 years later, they hold up. And her main thing, she talks about, philosophy and law, and that's what you have to understand, the philosophy they're using. Earlier on, when the nation was first formed here, the philosophy was such that there was a presumption of innocence, a presumption of confidence, and a presumption that men had rights, particularly creator-endowed inalienable rights, that governments could not interfere with. That's what the framers did for us. Ever since the enactment of the quote-unquote war amendments, it's been reversed, and now the government operates on the philosophy that that its citizens have no rights that it needs to respect. So to paraphrase a quotation from what they think is a truly infamous case, Dred Scott, I do it this way these days, that neither lawful de jure free white state citizens nor anyone else, for that matter, has any rights that the de facto National Socialist government is bound to respect. And that's the way it is. I mean, you can't find a right anywhere in sight here. I mean, right now, as I've said in my earlier videos, there's no right to a trial by jury in at least a criminal misdemeanor case. There's no right to an appeal, no right to habeas corpus, with actual innocence not being grounds for it to issue, no right to assistance of counsel, let alone effective assistance of counsel. And from where I sit, to use one of their licensed attorneys going into court loses the case. You might as well get convicted and go straight to jail, do not pass go, do not accept $200. I mean, it's just the way it is. Once in a while, they got to make it look good, and the accused will luck out on a technicality. But you use an attorney, and the court said he's an officer of the court and gives them the very jurisdiction we're challenging. Can't be done. So there's no rights anywhere in sight here. And they think you need a license to do everything. A license to drive your quote-unquote vehicle, a business license, a marriage license. Soon enough, it's going to be a license to breathe, too, for crying out loud. But if you know the legal definition of license, and I mentioned it before, and I'll repeat it here from Black's Fourth Law Dictionary, license, permission granted by competent authority to do an act that without such permission would be illegal, a trespass, or a tort. But wait a minute here. Didn't we, as members of the sovereign body, create this whole nation, republic, constitution, and you name it? And we need their permission to do these things? Whoa, you can see the problem. This is what beats them in court, because they can't oppose issues like this. They have nowhere to go. Anytime you talk about license, unless you're a corporation, and even then I wonder about it, but that's not for me to worry about. They got corporate attorneys who are going to do that. But for us to need their permission to do anything is utterly ridiculous. That's the kind of learning and mindset you get if you engage in reading of the books that I'm suggesting here. It comes to you, and sooner than you think, you're going to start to think like this and be amazed. It really isn't that hard. If they would have taught us in their damn mandatory public schools, it would be very much easier to do so. But trust me, it's not hard. It's my job to get across to you that, and to give you materials like this in order to allow you to do it, and take them on yourselves along with me. Thank you.